I'm Dane Rose, and in this brief exploration of love, I want to begin by just acknowledging that all thought is predicated on language. That if you try and think a thought without words, we can't. And so words are an important doorway into the energy and the masculine and feminine polarity that exists in all things. The structure creates the space for the energy, and the energy gives rise to the structure, and the masculine-feminine dance continues. And so in a masculine culture, we give birth to the feeling, to the energy of love through a competent structure, through a masculine structure, in this case language and ideas, that can lead to action and behavior and the creation of environments that induce the desired feelings. So we're going to go through a series of faces of love and just explore the insight each space provides. So the first thing I want to suggest is that every human being, in fact every consciousness, wants to feel sustainably good and wants to avoid feeling chronically bad. And that if you understand the deep codes and value hierarchies that underlie each human being and each set of behaviors, that it can be traced back at some age using certain definitions, meaning we often have faulty definitions of love from childhood because a lot of parental relationships include a lot of abuse that is not often named as abuse and gets recategorized as love. But every human being wants to feel sustainably good and wants to avoid feeling chronically bad. And so one way of looking at love, self-love, is the series of actions and choices and engagements that lead to the self feeling better and better. It's an infinite continuum, and that reduces unnecessary suffering. And that once one loves the self fully and creates a state within one's sphere of influence, within one's body and psyche, of feeling sustainably good and avoiding unnecessary chronic suffering to the best of our abilities, the natural movement of that meme, that viral expression, is outward. And one of the reasons for this is that the environment creates the individual creates the environment. And so if you want to create sustainably high resonance, high states of human consciousness, one must participate in co-creating a loving, nurturing, and healthy environment, including the culture around one, or the inner state implodes. Meaning, if we just create an isolated version of self-love and in no way participate in co-creating a healthy state in the people around us, over time the environment determines the individual. And so the easiest way to maintain in this most pure form of selfishness, the easiest way to sustain a high resonant state of maximum human well-being and minimal unnecessary suffering is to be in an environment that is conducive, that makes that state probable. In other words, if you're in a family of misery, in the long term, one either has to extricate oneself from that family if they are unable, unwilling to grow and change, or participate in lifting the field in the environment around us, which will in turn induce and make the high resonant state sustainable. So love is the direction, because there's an infinite continuum of suffering and well-being. Love is the direction towards sustainable well-being. The second thing is the hierarchy of human needs outlined by Abraham Maslow. And these are just another way of saying the same thing. Every human being in the history of humanity has had a need to survive. And this is the primary need, a need to survive, to have food, to have shelter, to have warmth, etc. And so self-love consists, first of all, of learning to interact with the environment in such a way that we have warmth, shelter, good food, etc. And the next need is to have security around meeting our survival needs. So first is to meet the need of survival. Next, in the hierarchy of human needs, is to create security. So in a capitalist framework, that includes savings and health insurance, and having contingencies and a car that works, etc., etc. So this is all involved with that second need of security of survival. And self-love, if you've met your need of survival, proceeds with meeting the need for security in that survival. And the third is love and belonging. And the need for love and belonging caps and reinforces the first few needs. If you look biologically at the evolution of the species, monkeys, apes, chimps are pack mammalian species, meaning they survive better in synergy, better in partnership. If you look at tribes of various forms of monkeys, our closest ancestors, you see that it's easier to survive and feel secure if you can groom one another, if one monkey can pick lice out of the other monkey, if one monkey can stand watch while the others are sleeping, if everyone communicates alarm and alert, if you communicate where the best feeding spots, if one person, if one monkey does this and another does this, that working as a team increases the efficiency of survival and security. And so love and belonging, to function in a community, is part of deepening and creating a more sustainable probability of survival and security. And so in this sense of love and belonging, to create trust. If there is no trust, there is no community. But it's also belonging, which requires the mirror neurons of the empathic brain. Because if you want to know if you belong and where you belong, if you belong and where you belong, it is the environment in which you raise a hand and say, I'm in pain here, and your pain matters to the other people in the circle as much as their own. That's a circle of belonging. And similarly, your opportunity, your dreams, your desires, your pleasure matters to the other people in the circle as much as their own. So if you say, I'm in a lot of pain around this joke, you guys are going on about this joke, it really hurts me. It rubs me the wrong way for this reason, and this reason. And the response in the group is sociopathic, i.e. to escalate the pain and not to attune and adjust. Then you do not belong in that group. Belonging is a technical context of interlaced mirror neurons in which who you are and your state matters. It doesn't just matter in words, we're very sorry and we're going to continue doing it. That's not mattering. It's to the degree of the others in the group. And so one of the things that emerges is, of course, that belonging is fragmentary, meaning that you may be in a group that if your arm is about to be cut off by a piece of dangerous machinery, that they will prioritize getting you to a hospital, etc. But if your heart is laced with poison and being cut to pieces by group dynamics, that doesn't matter. In other words, it's a chauvinistic form of belonging in which physical survival is attuned to, but emotional pain is actually escalated. Or if you're in a homophobic group and you don't fit the box of sexual preference of that group. You could be a heterosexual in a gay group, you could be a gay person in a heterosexual group, but where your strong feelings in this area, you are attacked for being who you are. But in this other area, you are supported in being who you are. And so there's a fragmentation in what parts of you belong. And so you may have the situation that's very common, in our kind of relatively low level of love and belonging culture, where this part of you is 50-50 belonging here. At least half the time someone's nice to this part of you, and half the time they ignore it or are cruel to it. And this other part of you gets some space and belonging here. Maybe your artistic side is welcomed in art class, but the rest of the time nobody's interested. And so there's not really any care for that part of you. So you belong, this part of you belongs here, and this part of you belongs 30% here, and this other part of you belongs nowhere. Because a cult, the root word of culture, a cult has a primary function of maintaining a status quo, a sense of norms that provide a sense of certainty, a sense of predictability. You know what to expect because that's how this cult behaves. That there are certain parts of who you are that do not belong anywhere. And we have a need for love and belonging. And at the deepest fulfillment of this need, a need for each part that we value and want to express that is authentic, to have belonging somewhere. And the same is true for those around us. If you say, I don't ever want to see you when you're not dressed nicely. I don't want to date you unless you have a Rolls Royce. Well, then the poverty or the statistical chance of possible failure, etc., doesn't belong. You don't have space for the other person's side that is part of who they are. So that part is an outcast. And one of the interesting, back notes on this thing is that, as in Rumi's poem, The Guest House, when you have a guest house that is big enough for you, and belonging begins with the self, does all of you belong inside your own framework of self-love and self-acceptance? Or are there large portions of who you are, who you hate, who you fear, who you want nothing to do with, who you will not honor and will not integrate in any way? Deny, suppress, attack, shame, deflect, such that parts of who you are do not feel any sense of belonging within the ego structure. And the parts that do not belong, that have no place to go, no home, no love, no honor, these are the outcasts. These are the rebels. And it's not that they were born outcasts and rebels. The outcasts and rebels in the self are those parts that the self excludes, rejects, and shames. And usually the self learns to exclude and shame and reject the parts of themselves that the surrounding cult, that the surrounding environment rejects, misunderstands, shames, and hurts. In other words, the process goes, you bring this part to your parents, and your parents give you a slap in the face. You bring this other part to your parents, and they scoff and laugh at you. And you bring this other part of the parents, and they look scared and kind of plead, please go away. We don't know how to deal with this part of you. And so in order to survive and feel secure and gain acceptance in the cult circle in which you're in, you agree to side with the majority, to side with the cult, and to reject those parts in yourself through suppression and denial that the cult rejects. And in doing so, it creates the phenomena where no one loves that part. It could be a part that is assertive and a bit angry in a New Age spiritual cult, where that anger has no place. There's no acknowledgement of the positive side of aggression. The parts that are banished outside the citadel of the welcomed psyche within and within the larger cults become rebels because they are outcast. And what they're rebelling against is the structure that makes them an outcast. And one can look in the larger sense of geometry at the psyche and at the whole, that for the whole to become one, that first there was the one, and then we brought in the conscious mind, and through language began to make distinctions. We take the peach and we say this bit is the peel. We call it a peel. We pull it off. This bit is the flesh, this bit is the seed, this bit is this bit is that. Well, it's all part of the peach. And in the journey through oneness into consciousness and distinction, and then ultimately back to oneness, the whole requires each part of the whole. And everything in a dualistic system has a positive and a negative potential. Every part of the whole has a positive and negative expression, meaning every part of the whole can, in the right position, in the right paradigm, in the right context, facilitate this movement towards sustainable well-being and away from unnecessary suffering. And every part of the whole can damage, can hamper that movement towards sustainable well-being. An example is part of that incomplete system. If a stranger with an STD says, I want to fuck you right now, and you say yes, there's a positive expression of that, but there's also a negative expression of that in terms of you may have an STD that you start, passing around. There is a positive and a negative expression of everything. Now, when something is categorically banished and suppressed and denied, as part of the evolutionary journey, that part, inside and out, must come back into a constructive relationship with everything else at some stage in the journey, or the journey is not complete. There is no waste. There is no garbage in the multiverse, in reality, in the psyche. There are only patterns of energy that an unsophisticated ego is capable of creating. And then, rather than acknowledging the inadequacy of that consciousness and ego to do something useful with what is created, it is termed, erroneously, it is labeled as garbage. But what one might more constructively do is label the consciousness that turned energy into a form that it didn't know what to do with, and then tried to bury it. One might consider that a faulty consciousness. So if there is any garbage, it's not in energy in any particular form of pattern. It is a state of consciousness that is capable of creating something it doesn't know what to do with, and then transfers its inadequacy onto the object it doesn't know what to do with. So if you go to landfills, for example, you will find an incredible reservoir of energy. No energy is created or destroyed in the universe according to physics. All energy simply changes form. And what you find is a massive amount of energy that has been taken from natural ecology by human beings and turned into things that human beings don't know what to do with, and therefore they don't want it because they don't know what to do with it. And this is a limitation of consciousness. It's not a limitation of energy, because in the evolutionary process, assuming the human species survives, there will reach a point of sophistication and intelligence where every single thing that was once classified as garbage is perceived as incredibly valuable as a resource in making something that a higher level of intelligence is capable of imagining and developing the technology to extract that energy and use it constructively. And when that occurs, the concept and the word of garbage will go away. And all that will be left is a memory of a consciousness that created the illusion of garbage by making things we didn't know what to do with. And the same is true with people. There are no garbage people. Human beings are incredibly sophisticated patterns of energy that have enormous potential to create massive amounts of sustainable well-being and enormous potential to create massive amounts of unnecessary chronic suffering. And so there's a technology and a consciousness problem. When we say, I don't want anything to do with that person, what we're saying is, I don't have the foggiest idea of how to turn the resource that this individual represents into something that is highly constructive for the field. And so rather than acknowledging my inadequacy, I'm just going to call them a garbage person, just like I call the things that I don't know what to do that I've produced in the process of consuming garbage things. And then there are thoughts that are produced by dysfunctional paradigms that we don't know what to do with these thoughts. Then there are feelings of pain and guilt and shame. We don't know what to do with them either. And so at a very low level of consciousness, we function as individuals and as a cult that creates massive amounts of energy in forms that we don't know what to do with, mentally, emotionally, sexually, financially, and ecologically. And it's useful to acknowledge that this is a direct product of a limitation of imagination and technology rather than a limitation of energy. No energy is ever created or destroyed, it's simply changed. And all energy has the potential to facilitate our ongoing journey towards sustainable well-being. Now, in the meeting of our own needs for love and belonging, it begins by learning to love and integrate all of the different pieces of ourselves, understanding what cultural and technological patterns created the various parts of us that are in pain and the various parts of us that are causing other parts pain. What's the force? What's the environment that's shaping this template of engagement that produces pain? And then scapegoats or ostracizes the parts of the self that it doesn't know how to deal with within the limited frame of the cult. So that's part of self-love and meeting our need for love and belonging. And once we meet our own needs for love and belonging, for example, once I know how to use my aggression to create more sustainable well-being and less unnecessary suffering, then I also know how to work with other people's aggression to do something similar, both for myself and for them, etc. So the art of self-love naturally ripples out into the art of loving another. One cannot love a part that one is terrified in oneself. And so there's a mastery and a development cycle. But the next need is for self-esteem. And self-esteem is the process of earning self-respect, meaning self-admiration, which we do by first having ideals. You know, in America, for example, one of the biggest ideals is to be cool, which is very high on the sociopathic continuum. It's outer focused, on image focused. Cool doesn't focus on the inner self, it focuses on appearance. And it often has to do with being dissociated. The desire to be cool is a cultural phenomena where in a high trauma, high abuse culture, almost everyone who is empathic is in a lot of pain. But nobody wants to be in a lot of pain. But if we lack the sophistication to upgrade the cult framework into one that doesn't create massive amounts of abuse, the next ideal might be to be immune from the abuse. And the best way to be immune from large amounts of pain is to go into the reptilian brain, which doesn't have feelings, to become more sociopathic. So someone says something cruel, but it doesn't affect me. I'm cool. Because I don't have feelings, because I don't acknowledge you as being a part of me. And so I solve the pain problem in a dysfunctional cult through dissociation by entering my reptilian brainstem, rather than solving it through teaching and learning the technology of creating a healthy circle of individuals. But regardless, if your goal is to be cool, if that's your ideal, then if you achieve that ideal and someone says something horrible to you and you don't care, and someone else says something insulting and you make a witty remark that makes you look good and makes them look stupid, and that's your goal, well, then you feel proud of yourself because you learned to be cool. And if your goal is to appear to be very confident or to be really confident, then if you achieve confidence, the process of mastering success through evidenced experience, the true form of confidence, is to do something well. And the way you know you do something well is you've done it a number of times well. And so naturally you feel confident to approach the same terrain again, whatever the terrain is. But whatever your ideal is, freedom, being cool, doing something well, having sex, being sexually attractive, whatever your ideal is, if you live the ideal that you've set for yourself, you will feel good about yourself because it's your ideal. And so self-esteem is the earned love of adopting the patterns that reflect our ideals. So the next need is self-esteem. We also have a need to develop our unique gifts, our unique talents, to discover what we're good at, to master what we're good at, and to, in that sense, realize those gifts. This is a need. And so when we take the time and say, you know, I'm really good at this, then the next step is to bring these out into the world. To bring these out into the world in such a way that the field of abundance increases. Usually a talent or a gift is something that we or other people value, whether it's playing the piano beautifully, or connecting and bringing a smile to a room, or making scared, nervous people feel deeply at ease and feel accepted. Whatever the talent is, typically, if it's something we consider a gift and a talent, it is something that brings abundance of what? Of some form of energy that increases sustainable well-being and decreases unnecessary suffering. You could say one has a gift to be sadistically cruel, and it certainly might be a honed art, but it's not usually a gift that we're drawn to develop and bring out, and certainly we won't be celebrated in our cult surrounding for, mastering, the art of raping someone efficiently. So to develop our gifts and bring them out in the world is the next need, in a way that creates abundance. An abundance of sustainable well-being a reduction in unnecessary suffering. This is a need. And this leads to the last of the hierarchy of needs, which is we all need, upon the realization of our talents and who we are and love and belonging, etc., we all need to reach beyond the limited self, to be a part of something bigger, to transcend the myopia of the egoic, isolated individual by becoming a part of something bigger than ourselves, a group, a spiritual practice, a vision, a journey, a species, an ecology, a religion, something that is bigger than us, that is transcendent, that is more than us. We need, finally, at the last, to acknowledge that we are a part of something bigger and engage with it. So these are our hierarchy of needs. So self-love consists of meeting these needs in ourselves. And loving another consists of behaving in such a way that another person survives, feels secure, feels a sense of love and belonging, has a sense of self-esteem, develops their gifts, integrates them with the world, and finally becomes a part of something bigger than themselves. Now, a lot of this is repetition of the same stuff from a slightly different angle. So another kind of direction and dimension of love is that love begins with self-absorption. And self-love is self-absorbed. But it moves towards absorption with others. So there's a direction between, when one is in a state of trauma, uncertain about one's survival, one is in a highly self-absorbed state because one's down with survival and security. And no one is more narcissistic than someone who is uncertain if whether they will survive, whether they will feel secure. But upon mastering self-love, the attention moves outwards. It's a direction of all about me, all about my family and here, all about my community, all about my country, all about my species, all about life, all about consciousness. So love is a direction that begins within with self-absorption and gets more and more absorbed with others. It's also a masculine and feminine process. So what we tend to think about as love, I love you, I have this feeling. It's the feminine state of love. But it's an incomplete state. It's like it's just beginning to bud. And to experience the fruit of love, it has to go through. It has to be powered by that initial feeling, that initial impulse, all the way over to the masculine expression of love, which is competency. And a good way to look at this is, whether you feel loved by a brain surgeon who chops your head off with good intention. And, of course, we don't. We're dead. In order to feel loved by someone who loves us, they actually have to be competent at delivering the energy of their love in a form in which we feel loved. And so I want to describe this process. So it begins with this feeling of, I feel love for you, I love you. And this has zero guarantee of having a positive impact. And the next step in the blossoming process of love is caring. Okay, I love you, but do I love you enough to care about you, not just about my love, but do I care about you? And so we have a little bit of an opening of the bud. But it can't stop with caring. Do I care enough about you to see you? Do I care enough to see? And seeing doesn't just it's not just this big gestalt of just instant seeing. To see someone requires respect, to look and look again, which takes time. It takes dimension. Spect, to see, respect, to see, and see again. Do I care enough about you to see you? To see you financially? To understand okay, you've got this coming in, this going out, this is your process, here's how you make money. Because if I don't see you and I try to love you, I'm running blind, I'm flying blind. And so I'm going to bang into things that I don't see. Do I care enough to see you emotionally? To understand how your feelings are put together, your meanings of words, your love language, your ideal relationship? What's going on in your life? Do I care enough to see? Financially, emotionally, mentally, logistically. What about your traumas? Do I care enough to see your traumas, your pain points, and how to avoid them and support you? Do I care enough to see? But seeing isn't in the end of it. Okay, I see you. I can see you and I can judge you in the same areas that I judge myself. But if I want to move beyond seeing, I have to understand you. I have to not only see, but I have to understand how all these things fit together. And understanding is a very ecological process. Because if I want to see, for example, why you're a white supremacist, I may have to see and thus understand the influence of parenting, the influence of culture. I may have to understand the culture, not just you, but the culture that produced you. Because you weren't born a white supremacist. You were born with a very wide possibility field. And if you had been raised here, or here, or here, or here, of the 10,000 cults or cultures in human history, we're one of a few in 10,000 that produce white supremacists. Most of them, it didn't occur to them. So the seeing has to go into understanding, which is kind of an algorithm of flow, how this part becomes this part, your need for significance leads to this, and then you couldn't be significant in your family this way, this way, this way, or this way. But you could be significant as a white supremacist. And your need for significance, to matter, to register and develop some rapport with your environment led you to develop this. So there's an understanding, which starts to make the seeing into a felt experience, which is why understanding is not enough. I can understand this about you and still hurt you. I can understand this and cause problems for you. It's not the end of love. Do I understand you enough to empathize? And empathizing involves the heart as well as the mind. And so the brain is using mirror neurons to create a microcosm of the person you're learning about and coming to understand inside your body, so that you can relate to them by relating to the part of them that you've internalized through mirror neurons, through biology, so that you now have a part of your body that knows what their body is going through, because your body is going through it. You've aligned, which is why it's not just enough to empathize. Oh, I really empathize with what it's like to be homeless. And I've got to go. I've got a busy appointment watching Netflix tonight. And so off I go. It's empathizing enough to attune, to change. I understand you enough to empathize, and I empathize enough to change. Change in what way? To change and in order to succeed, in order to be competent. Competent at what? Because I can empathize, and I can attune, and I can still fail. I can get it wrong. I can say, I think you're the person that would like to hear this. And then they say, no, that's not what I want to hear at all. I want to hear this. So then there's a flaw in the process. Maybe you didn't see clearly enough. Maybe you didn't care enough to see clearly enough. Maybe you didn't see enough to understand, or understand enough to empathize with the nuance of that situation. Or maybe I empathize, but I didn't really think about attuning to you. I just did my own default thing. This is what I like, so I'm going to do it to you. So it's to attune so as to succeed at what? Well, the self-centered narcissistic might attune to succeed at getting into bed with you. But the adult, the mature love, is to succeed at behaving in such a way that you increase your odds of surviving, being secure in that survival, having a sense of love and belonging, having a sense of self-esteem, becoming the person you want to be, developing your talents, bringing those talents out into the world, and becoming part of something bigger than yourself. If I love you enough to go through that whole process of seeing, understanding, empathizing, attuning, and succeeding at helping you meet your human needs, the measure of my success of moving from the feminine state of love to the masculine state of competent love can be measured by the spontaneous feelings that occur in any individual who is consistently and trustworthily supported in surviving, feeling secure, having a sense of love and belonging, developing self-esteem. Meaning, if I consistently behave in a way that increases your survival, your security, your love and belonging, your self-esteem, your development of gifts, your integration with the community with those gifts, you're becoming a part of something bigger than yourself. The human instrument, that is the human heart, produces feelings that register that success. And these feelings include gratitude. You don't have to force it. If someone helps you consistently meet your human needs, gratitude is natural and inevitable. Safety is another feeling you will have. You will feel safe with someone who is consistently behaving in a way that boosts your ability to meet your human needs, because that's what a safe person is. So you will feel safe because you are safe. You will feel gratitude because that feels good. You will feel pleasure on your journey of self-realization, of self-actualization. And you will associate that pleasure with the people in your life who are helping you on that journey. You will feel joy. You'll feel safe, you'll feel joy, you'll feel gratitude, you'll feel pleasure. And the alchemy of these feelings coming together over time will leave you first feeling loved, and then feeling love towards the person or the entity that's having that effect. Feeling love and then feeling loved towards the person who helped you self-actualize to meet your human needs. Now, this is the viral pattern of love, which is why another expression is love is a virus. Love that successfully transmits begins with self-love of one individual, then externalizes that to the whole process, loving enough to care, caring enough to see, seeing enough to understand, etc., to emerging to where another person looks at you and feels a oneness, feels a connection. Because they're trying to self-actualize, and you're trying to help them self-actualize. So you are one in a core metric of understanding and becoming. And you don't have to force the feelings. They erupt naturally from the scientific instrument of the human heart. Now, another dimension, or another way of saying the same thing, is that love is a movement towards sustainable fun. And fun is interesting because it's one of the only self-referential energies that holds on its own. If you think of freedom, for example, I want to be free. America, the home of the free and the brave. Well, whether it's true or not, freedom is a double-edged sword. Plenty of people use their freedom to destroy their bodies, destroy other people's lives, shame themselves mercilessly, hurt other people, and die in mediocrity. So freedom is not something you can reference on its own. It's in service to something bigger than freedom. The reason freedom is important as a neutral energy that can be used destructively and constructively is that it has the potential to be used constructively. And in using it constructively can lead towards that underlying drive to feel sustainable well-being and avoid chronic suffering. So freedom is a tool on that underlying drive. It's not an end in and of itself. The same is true with power, which is another face of freedom. If you have power, you can create more well-being, or you can create more suffering for yourself and other people. It's not an end in and of itself. To have power just to have power, just to have power, doesn't facilitate this underlying drive towards sustainable well-being. But it's hard to move rapidly towards sustainable well-being if you lack power and lack freedom. So they are technologies in and of themselves. Love and fun, and one can think even of success, like why is success important? Well, it's not. Success is important in terms of what it produces, which is a higher state of well-being. Because normally people don't set out to be successful at ruining their lives on a conscious level. So success isn't important. One can successfully ruin one's life. One can successfully destroy the environment. One can successfully do all kinds of things. But the reason success is valuable is that if you use success with freedom to create sustainable well-being for yourself and those around you, then it's fun. Love is fun. Success is fun. Power is fun when you use power to create fun. A lot of things converge in this pinnacle of states. And fun is the only thing that doesn't need a reason. You don't need a reason to have fun. Your reason to have fun is because it's fun. And the reason it's fun is because it's fun. And so success, freedom, power, discipline, struggle, suffering, etc., sacrifice, all of these things are in service to a higher deity, to a higher state that ends in sustainable, conscious fun. If success wasn't fun, we wouldn't do it. If power wasn't fun, we wouldn't do it. If being a victim wasn't more fun than just feeling nothing, we wouldn't do it. There's a continuum of fun that underlies this movement towards sustainable well-being that is ultimately self-referential. It's fun because fun is fun. And it's more fun to have fun than it is not to have fun. And so at a high level of mastery and self-awareness, consciousness chooses to have more fun because having more fun is more fun. And the journey of love is taking us in that direction. It's an intelligent virus. Competent love produces more love, which is more fun than being reptiles, which is the sociopathic program of the reptilian brain. Being a reptile is more fun than not existing. And so we evolved out of reptiles into mammals, into human beings, etc., but we keep the reptilian brainstem for those situations where we are surrounded by sociopaths, because that's what the reptilian brain competently survives. With fight, flight, freeze, and fawn, none of which are terribly fun, you survive a reptilian environment of sociopathic people who are living by their reptilian brain. And surviving is more fun than not surviving. It's just not very fun. Number 7, honoring the connection mathematically to function as one. So any competent scientist that follows the thread of mathematics, of geometry, of biology, of history, of ecology, of economy, of the psyche, any competent scientist in any of these fields can trace the link between a given pattern of energy, be it a human ego, be it an atom, be it a tree, and every other thing in the multiverse. Meaning there are innate links between the present and the past and the future, between the biology of this individual and the biological history and organisms that participate. All you have to do to realize that you're not separate is hold your nose. Now, you'll be dead in 10 minutes because you're surviving on tree shit. Every life cycle takes energy in and releases energy out. And the interesting innate dance of ecology is that one thing's out-breath is another thing's in-breath. So trees breathe out oxygen, we breathe in oxygen. We are linked to the trees. You look at the same thing with a harvest. A mango tree gives us a mango, and we shit out nutrients for a mango tree, and the life cycle continues. We are intricately and inextricably one. We are functioning as part of a multidimensional, vast equation that can be tracked scientifically by any competent scientist that will let go of dogma and actually follow the thread. So there are just so many things. If you look at physics, there's a connection between this pinky and every star in the multiverse. Well, one of those connections is the gravitational constant. Another is atomic structure. Another is space-time. We are linked upon linked upon linked upon linked upon linked in every single dimension with the rest of everything that is. Now, the fact that we have a cult that develops and cultivates a paradigm of the isolated, lone, autonomous, independent individual means no more or less than that we are part of a cult that creates the illusion of isolated, autonomous individuals. The science does not support the dogma. Cults have come and gone with great rapidity over the last 30,000 years, with an estimated 10,000 cults in human history. Every cult has their own language. Every cult has their own belief system, their own mythology, their own deity. Our deity is money, rationalism, science, and appearance, as well as masculine traits in men and women. These are our deities. Every cult has a deity, has a series of deities. And every cult is incomplete. Every cult is ultimately flawed in the human journey towards sustainable well-being and away from unnecessary suffering, which is why most of them are dead. Most cults in human history are no more. And the odds out of 1 in 10,000 that we have the only cult that's right is ludicrous. There has yet to be a cult that fully captured the complexity, the unity of the relationship between the particle, you and me, and the field, the whole that we are a part of. The human brain is not capable of conceptualizing the full complexity of our relationship with all that is. And so rather than just saying, wow, it's just very complex, we make up simplistic models called cults, where we all agree to talk like this and say things and view this. And it comforts us. It comforts us to say that this is reality. But cults are not reality. They are fragmented lenses through which to see a very small part of reality, and they usually overemphasize certain things and blind spot around others, which creates unnecessary suffering and precludes certain amounts of sustainable well-being. So to honor the connection that we have mathematically as one, as synergy, is to reconstruct the whole of which we are a part. And the sphere is one of this most majestic of geometrical shapes that we know, because the sphere is one, which is the feminine expression, the oneness, but it's also the infinite, because a computer generates a sphere. We generate a sphere with an infinite number of dots and lines, and it's not actually infinite. Every computer has its processor limitations. And so we give up. A computer takes the infinite color spectrum and refracts it into 256 million colors. Well, at that point, we can't keep track between 256,980,000 and 980,001. We're lucky if we hold on to 30 colors. That's a light blue, that's a dark blue, that's a this blue, that's a red, and so the whole exists in this paradox of being one and infinite, because its refraction points are really limited to human consciousness. We have a 60,000 word vocabulary, and most of us use less than 1,000 words. So that's our refraction point. We kind of rough out reality, kind of using those words as placeholders to let us engage with some of who we are. But to love is to acknowledge the unity of the larger energy pattern of which we are a part. And to consciously love is to track that connection back to the one. To understand that on a physics level, we are one with the energy equation. We are part of the equation. that on a consciousness level, we are one with the consciousness equation. Our consciousness affects other consciousness combine to produce our consciousness. The consciousness of our mother and our father combine to produce, in their absence and presence, in their this and that, to influence and shape our consciousness. That our consciousness shapes other consciousness. You cannot create an isolated consciousness without the equation of consciousness in the past. Our consciousness is affected by the consciousness in our trees, in our earth. At every single dimension, there is a mathematical equation that links us to every other thing that ever has existed, does exist, or will exist on every dimension upon which we can track the equation. And to love is to move in the direction of acceptance, of openness, of embrace, of participating freely and willingly in that equation in such a way that we are moving towards feeling sustainably good and avoiding chronic suffering. Now, number 8 is Faces of the Soul in Evolution. So, in the tarot archetypes, you have the infinite possibility field of the human psyche, which is a microcosm of the infinite possibility field of all that is, expressed in these archetypal polarities. You have the lover and the warrior, for example. Now, you are not a 100% lover and you're not 100% warrior. Your individual refraction as a human ego emphasizes certain traits in this color spectrum of the psyche that are metaphorically represented by the ideals, by the extremes of the archetypes. And the archetypes each have a positive and negative expression. You can use your warrior to destroy love, or you can use your warrior to protect the innocence and the blossoming of love with a certain ferociousness. You know, when you don't interrupt a beautiful first date and text because your warrior says no. Cut it out. There's no room for mediocrity at the birth of something important. When the warrior says, turn off the TV, the family needs a conversation to protect the organism of a healthy, integrated family. The warrior can do that, or the warrior can fight you when you try and interrupt an addiction. Your spouse says, come on, no more beers. And the warrior can say, no. Who are you to tell me what to do? I'm going to fuck up my life if I want to. And so every archetypal energy has its positive and negative expression as part of a sphere, as part of a whole. And so part of the dance of human intelligence and human evolution is to learn the geometry of the psyche that creates a constructive synergy with each archetypal force within that allows us to engage constructively with the world around us to create more sustainable well-being and avoid more unnecessary chronic suffering. So the archetypal energies are part of the faces of soul, but you also have the evolution of each archetypal energy and the evolution of the ego. Every single ego is born an infant, becomes a child, and becomes an adolescent, becomes a young adult, and then becomes an adult. Though becoming an adult is not guaranteed. The biology will take care of the first child, adolescent, young adult. And it'll leave you there. We have a culture of children and adolescents in grown bodies because we do not initiate our population into adulthood. It requires a transcendent ordeal to become an adult, moving beyond the limited sense of the ego. In traditional tribes, there's a great movie called The Emerald Forest. You can see how that particular tribe took a young man through a harrowing ordeal of sleep deprivation, of stinging ants, of dancing, of chanting, of a hallucinogenic snuff, of a circle held in container, for them to have a transcendent experience to go beyond the limited sense of the programmed ego and reconnect with the whole, to remember the connection that is otherwise lost in cult brainwashing and cult programming, to remember, to put back together the equation that links us to something bigger than our parents, bigger than our cult, bigger than our egoic image. And in this process of transcending the self, we create an adult. An adult is born, and the adult is the only part of the psyche. It is the only stage of development that is capable of love in the fullest sense of the word. Because the child has the love of need. I need you. And the child does. The adolescent has the love of curious lust. I want you. And the adolescent does. The young adult is in that puer state of seeking freedom and mystery, and does, finding themselves, right? But it is only an adult that can meet the needs of the child who needs you. It is only an adult that can have the broader vision to be responsible, to respond in a competent and loving way to facilitate the adolescent's curiosity and lust within a way that creates sustainable well-being rather than wreckage and havoc. And it is the adult that can support the ongoing self-exploration of the young adult. The adult is the one capable of loving the self. It is the adult, initiated out of the culture, that can come back and welcome in the wounded parts of the child that the cult trampled on, executed, shamed, banished. The adult is the only one capable of loving the child, the adolescent, and the young adult in oneself. And having loved oneself, the adult love is the first love that is not narcissistic. I need, I want, I am exploring. Great. There are three forms of love. And in a sibling society outlined by Robert Bly, we have a culture of people seeking other people, other adults, well, there are children and adolescents and young adults who are seeking a missing adult who wasn't there in parenting, who wasn't there in the maturation process of the culture, to meet my need, to meet my lust, to support me to discover myself, to help me be me. I'm looking for someone who will support me to be me. They're looking for their own adult. Most of us spend a lifetime looking for one adult who will love us enough to meet our needs, our lust, our exploration. It is the adult that is capable of doing that, first for themselves, and then the adult is the first one that looks outward and says, how can I be loving? Loving enough to care, caring enough to see, seeing enough to understand, understanding enough to empathize, empathizing enough to attune, attuning enough to succeed, succeeding enough to help you become the best you that you can be, a self-actualized self, who in the self-realization of your potential looks back and loves me as an adult. This is the evolutionary process of the phases of our soul, from birth to initiation and adulthood. And with that comes stages of relating. The child relates to the world with sympathy. It accepts everything because it needs to in order to survive. The adolescent relates to the world with antipathy. You have sympathy, you have antipathy. The child, the adolescent. It's the adult that synthesizes. It's the adult that says, yes, I know you're a yes to all-night video games and this and that and the other, but let's limit it to an hour. We've got a busy day tomorrow. It's the adult that looks at the adolescent and says, I know you'd like to fuck the entire world. Fuck them. I get it. None of it's perfect. But this bit is better than nothing, this bit's better than nothing, this bit's better than nothing, and so we're going to take pieces of it and other pieces of it, we're going to combine it in new ways and do what we can with the pieces available to us to create more sustainable well-being and mitigate more unnecessary suffering.